and welcome to Connects Live. Today we're going to be featuring Vivek Bhaskaran and Romi Mahajan. They're going to be talking about AI tools and going beyond CX with AI tools. Welcome, guys. I appreciate you being here.
Awesome to be here.
Great to be here, Mark. Thanks for having us.
Awesome. So, first of all, let's talk just a little bit about what AI is and how it helps in all types of businesses for now, and then we're going to get into some more details on it. So I don't know who's the expert here on that.
Vivek, why don't you start, then I'll add in.
Well, I'm the skeptic over here, I would argue. Like, okay, fine. I mean, I think there's too many people saying that everything is AI. I think my viewpoint on AI is that, linear regression is not artificial intelligence. Structured equations are not artificial intelligence. So AI at its core is, machine learning, and machine learning means tons of data and coming up with formulas based on the data, as opposed to coming up with formulas and then applying it to data. So that's my definition of AI, although everybody claims that everybody's got AI, so which I'm obviously very skeptical about.
Yeah, I work at Quantarium. We are an AI company applying AI to residential real estate in a B2B context. I do agree with Vivek mostly. It's what I call rhetorical AI versus real AI, right? And AI is actually a concept. I think the term was invented, I think, by Minsky in 1950 something, right? So the concept's been around 7 decades. It's come to the fore recently because it's got so many claimants, right? So many people are claiming AI. To Vivek's point, anyone who manipulates data or who has multivariate analysis in what they do is claiming AI. I mean, listen, you're all on LinkedIn. I get probably 10 LinkedIn requests a day from people doing list and like lead brokering, and they all talk about they're using AI to find the right leads and so on and so forth. And what they really mean is they're looking at a couple lists and copying and pasting and so on and so forth. So there is a thing called AI. It's real, as Vivek says, machine learning, computer vision, etc., pattern recognition, having machines learn and then be able to produce, maybe even having machines as cognitive beings. But we're the early innings, and I would claim that 99% of the claims around AI, especially, and I'll be sensitive here, especially in areas like sales and marketing, are, to be very frank, horseshit. So, yeah.
So I've had limited experience with AI tools, but it was kind of an interesting thing in business intelligence area. Just happened to be with Microsoft, and what happened was I was trying to analyze a bunch of survey data. There was 5,000 respondents, right? And there was probably 60 questions, and about half of those were open-ended. Yeah. And it was ridiculous because these people were writing full stories. I mean, full paragraph and beyond for each answer. There was no way to get down to the details on each one of these things. The AI tool at least created the buckets, and then it sort of got close to it. And it was very helpful for that. Tell me some other ways AI tools can be used in surveys, open ends, and other kind of just time-saving things.
Yeah. Vivek, expert on surveys, so yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think, one of the ways, and Jonathan is over here, he brought up an interesting idea about, using survey data to kind of map emotions. I think it's kind of, deviating a little bit from AI, but realistically bringing a new dimension to it. Typically in CX, if you think about it, we are kind of mapping, what people think, and we're trying to elicit what people think. But I think with Jonathan's model, where we are trying to map it to emotions, we've done that, in the context of, for example, with a company called Emotion Research Lab, and a couple of people have done where they've taken facial code and map it to emotions, really, right? So like, okay, how do you think? That is kind of, I would say, that is kind of a little bit of machine learning and a little bit of facial recognition. But again, in the context of surveys, I think I'm super interested with what Jonathan is doing, which is mapping a set of questions or comments and mapping them to not just, an aggregate of them, a combination of the questions map up to an emotion, really. And if you can draw that correlation significantly and say, well, these are the emotions that are being exposed because of these set of variables or questions or however that's phrased. So now you have a correlation to how people are emotionally feeling about a particular construct, without actually having to have like a video call / an audio call or something to that effect, which is kind of obviously it's from a data collection perspective has its own set of challenges and nuances. So I think that's one of the, Mark, you asked like what are kind of interesting ideas that are coming up. I think that's a brilliant, at least kind of a idea around trying to kind of go beyond just kind of obviously frequency analysis and correlation and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, my perspective, Vivek, Mark, and everyone here, and obviously anyone can chime in, is that one of the areas in which AI, machine learning, computer vision, all these things come into play in this context is what the old, scale and speed thing, right? So you do a survey, you elicit metaphors or data in some way, you get millions or thousands of results. How do you analyze that with some fidelity, with scale and speed, so that you can act on the insight that might have been derived from that, right? And so, again, I think you have to add those elements. Now, what I will say is on the stuff that Vivek's talking about, which is going beyond the analog, right? Going beyond the binaries that typically inform things like surveys, or when you think about emotions, etc. But it only really matters when you can predictably suggest that the emotions being shown, number one, can be understood, and number two, are acted upon in a certain way, right? So for instance, if you show a video and people have some emotion X, are they more likely to do something? Vote for Mr. X, vote for Miss Y, buy product X, buy product Y. And so you have to go through full cycles, right? And this, of course, is fraught with a lot of dangers, right? And it has to be perfected. I mean, the same words, the same concepts, the same stories, depending on the context, can elicit or create wildly different results. And I'll give you an example. Take the word predictable, right? So in the stories, right, Mark, you're talking about the verbatims, right? You look at verbatims. Mm-hmm. And if you're looking at healthcare, right, and you say, God, that doctor is predictable, predictably, I get predictable care, etc., that's a great thing. If you take Hollywood and you say that movie's predictable, that means something bad, right? And so contextual deep verticalization is necessary, I think, from an AI perspective, to actually go beyond rhetoric and make it real.
Yeah, that contextual kind of mapping, I think, is kind of where we also see kind of a lot of traction, and quite frankly, we also see the future. We recently acquired a company called Empresas. They're highly focused in automotive, really. So they only do CX for automotive only. And they've developed a pretty kind of rich taxonomy around what it means when you give feedback, when you purchase a car, when you purchase, when you go to when you go to a dealership, really. So it's really extremely focused around those scenarios, really. And therefore, the richness and the quality of the data is kind of like, therefore, you can apply some models to it. And you can even apply models between clients, really, if you think about it. You can learn from one client and apply that model to another client, because from a consumer's perspective, whether you go to a Toyota dealership or you go to a Honda dealership or you go to, I'm the same guy going to all three dealerships, really. And my perspective and my reaction is generally going to be the same. It's not that just because I go to a Honda dealership, I'm going to be, behaving completely different, or my expectations are going to be completely different. So Romi, I think kind of, in your case, obviously you guys are focused in on kind of financial services, but I think the same logic applies to kind of different industries where you kind of, I believe that companies are going to start developing rich taxonomies and rich kind of models in a particular space, in a particular vertical. Even, for example, Mark, even I was talking to Endeavor. Endeavor is, they own Ironman, they own, Fashion Week, they do tons of events. They are kind of an event production, a massive event production company. And we are working with them to kind of develop an event-focused kind of reaction model, right? Like it's 100% on events, physical events, and obviously right now it's a shit show, but kind of a reaction model for that particular vertical, really, and that's going somewhere because we can apply data from multiple events, apply data from multiple clients, and aggregate the data together.
This
Well,
is a
yeah,
weird point of view on this. One quick question.
yeah.
You know, the idea of singularity, right? When machines take over and they become highly intelligent. And I'm kind of curious, you know, at what point do we define the experience of using AI, or is the experience enhanced by it? Is it over time? Is it agile? Is it tweaking? Or exactly, you know, what's the influence here? Is it the experience that exists or could be, or is it defined you're going to go this path like an IKEA store?
Well, I have a couple different prongs of an answer there, right? So one is, AI up till now, it does not, most computers don't pass the Turing test, right? Things don't pass, they don't act like humans. They don't have the wisdom, the compassion, the bedside manner, kids still like to be hugged by parents, etc., right? And so machines haven't replaced humans in any way in that sense. Maybe in some rote tasks they have, right? So I think the biases and the human elements that are programmed into these pattern recognition tools, right, do expose themselves. And so the AI manifestation is indeed very human, and can be as biased or nasty or compassionate, right, as human beings are. I do think going forward, one has to be very careful in let's say in the digital world, thinking about AI from a perspective of personalization. And I don't mean for the obvious reasons in terms of privacy, etc. It means that you create this tiny walled garden of so-called relevant experiences, but then you're essentially every single experience you have digitally is then an adjacent experience to one you already had. So you're not looking at the new world. So when I get recommendations, right, for news, I typically read fairly left oriented or liberal news feeds. I just get more of that. I'm in my filter bubble. Same thing on with other folks. So one has to be very careful in when one invokes or wants AI and all this emotional cognition, behavioral assessments being made, because it can also create a very narrow human being, right? And God, we need way less of that, right? As we can see in a world that is so fractious, right? So I think it's really both. I think we create, we're also created by. It's like media of any sort. It's no different than that.
And
Reinforcing biases.
Say it again.
It's reinforcing biases.
Absolutely, absolutely.
right.
Yeah. And even like buildings are constructed. You talked about automotive, and yeah, I've done a lot of studies on automotive where we changed the whole building to facilitate a buying experience instead of a selling experience.
Yeah.
And that had to do with everything from seating to when you walk in to how service, where it is, and things like that. Studies back in the 80s and 90s changed those things. So within the idea, I want to get a little bit more with you, Rami, on the idea of what how is AI helping fintech, or however you say that,
Yeah.
and in real estate and stuff like that. I know you're kind of advanced in that area. Tell us about
Well,
that.
so yeah, let me pause on the real estate example, then I'll go to maybe a wider investing and so on and so forth. So real estate, residential real estate is the biggest asset class in the world. In the US, the total aggregate number of residences is worth about $40 trillion. Worldwide, about $185 trillion, right? This year in the US, about between 6 and 7 million houses will sell. And there's probably 10 or 15 million monetizable events in general, whether it's a refi, a default, or whatever, right? That goes on. Now, where can AI be brought in from a customer experience perspective? Anybody who's ever bought and sold a house, right? And which is probably 90% of the people on this call, understand that it's like an 11 or 12-step process. It's disconnected. It's very hard in one screen or in one experience to get all the information you need. There's some machine, there's some human. Some of the processes, depending on the vicissitudes or mood of the loan officer, right, of the title company, etc. So it's just this morass of problems, right? Now, clearly, AI can help from the perspective of data, from the perspective of what's the valuation, what's value should you be paying for it, right? When along the process have you seen enough houses statistically where you're not going to get a wide variety of other things? When you model when you buy a house, You can use computer vision, for instance, to tell the condition of a house. So right now, when you look at a house and you look at all of its statistics, let's say you go to Zillow and you get a price of $1 million or $500,000. No one knows what the condition of the house is. Do you have crown molding inside, or is it a meth lab inside? Who knows, right? It's not told by the statistics, right? So can you use computer vision to do that at scale? So real estate being fundamentally transformed. Now take investing, right? Now, I think investing is more complicated. Think about the number of people who buy stock or in the US, right? Whether through directly or through mutual fund or retirement account, et cetera. Well, there's probably been 100 companies that have tried to use AI to determine what they call investing signals, right? A whole bunch of Twitter tweets are going on around some company, should you buy it or sell it? What they call data exhaust, right? So can you absorb the data exhaust and interpret it? Well, guess what? 97% of day traders lose money, right? So here we have this advanced signaling and AI everywhere that's available for not that much cost to people. 97% of people who are trading lose money. Now that's a twain that hasn't been, that twain is weird. I can't connect those two things, right? So with investing, it's much more complicated, and therefore I think human wisdom comes into play, right? And finally, AI can be awesome from a pattern recognition backwards. Can it help you go forward? And the fact is, AI only, you look at imperfect data sets, you get imperfect information, you make imperfect choices. So yeah, FinTech is absolutely changing because of AI, but not as profoundly in every aspect as you might think. Way bigger in some areas of FinTech than in others. Yeah. So, any other opinions? I mean, this seems like
Viv,
an
how about you?
group of people.
And I want to talk. I want to talk about like creativity versus experience. I think that's kind of an important element that gets missed when we talk about experience in general. I think if you think about, a lot of kind of tectonic shifts have come up because of creativity, right? So users have to be so in terms of measurement models, I think most measurement models and even AI models will incrementally, as much as everybody thinks, I don't believe that AI models are going to exponentially change things. It's creativity that changes kind of directionally, right? I mean, Mark, you talked about, Capital One introducing coffee shops as part of their program, really, right? Capital One, obviously financial services company, free, I think it's free. I think it's free coffee. You can it's like a Starbucks experience, really, right? So a Starbucks experience inside Capital One. I mean, clearly an AI model didn't come up with that. A human being came up with it and said like, hey, can we do that? And then they validated, and then they kind of probably tested it and kind of did a bunch of things. So I think in a lot of kind of experience conversations, creativity is lost and creativity is kind of shunned to some extent. Like, oh, we want the data. And, well, creativity ain't gonna give you the, it is by definition, you gotta do, and that's why I think like sometimes you do have to step back and say like, hey, are we being creative enough from an experience delivery perspective, right? And that's an extremely subjective argument. It has nothing to do with AI. In my mind, it's nothing to do with AI. It's more like the people personality and kind of the executive capacity to take risks is what determines creativity, really. So I think that's kind of orthogonal to AI to some extent, but AI and machine learning will help improve, can validate and execute on creativity, but creativity is an important element. And that's at least my viewpoint.
Yeah, by the way, I just want to echo that because I fully agree with Vivek on this matter. One of the things going into this conversation, right, we talked a little bit about customer experience and AI. And I'll tell you what I think the fundamental conundrum in the CX space is. And Vivek will know this because at his X Day event last year or a couple of years ago, I mentioned this as well. And that is that the experience that a customer or a participant loves or realizes or measures his or her own experience on is exactly the opposite of the thing the marketers measure, right? So the marketers measuring how many people did this, and if you look at Starbucks, how many people turned left after they ordered their latte or scratched their nose or did that the other. And as a consumer, all I care about is, did I have a friendly conversation with a nice barista? Was the coffee decent? Did it not break the bank? And so on and so forth. So it's funny that the things that we're forcing marketers to measure in CX are exactly the opposite things that actually matter to the customer. And therefore, creativity, emotion, connection, etc. I mean, think about the stores you love, right? Think about the stores you love. You like when someone says, is kind to you that day, or lets you return something without asking you a ton of questions, Nordstrom, Costco, etc. That's nothing to do with AI. That all has to do with some understanding of the way humans operate and the way they emote.
Fascinating. I wanted to open up to anyone here who may have a question or something. It looks like Carl, you want to come on? It looks like you have a question here.
Sure, here I am. Yeah, so, either, Vivek or Romi can respond to this, but here's my question. I mean, we hear so much about AI. I guess my question is, when would we see, when in the foreseeable future, do you believe we'll be looking at AI in retrospect? In other words, here it is, it's been in place and it's part of our daily lives. We live with it to such a degree that we don't even refer to it as AI. It's here and it's with us, but we don't call it that. Do you ever see a time where that will be?
Well, I mean, I think Vivek would answer the same way. We're living in all of the same eras simultaneously. In some aspects of our life, right, we are already breathing the air of AI, right? We don't even know it, right? With how are you considered by rating agency, right? When you go for a home loan or something, you're already being looked at by machines. When you send a resume into a job,
Oh, that's true. Yeah.
right? It's happening already. Machines are looking at all kinds of stuff and filtering you and so on and so forth. So it's already mother's milk or air we breathe. In other areas, like, I don't know, your relationships or your habits, your eating habits, or other things that are very vital, your vacation habits, etc. Yeah, I think that we have to exercise some control over the machine in that regard. So I think we're living in many eras simultaneously. It's not a linear progression, and it's not a progression that's equal in all aspects of life.
So it's pretty subtle. See, when I look up something on the internet, all of a sudden I start getting emails or I get messages from Amazon here. You might like this product because they know that I've been looking at these things, right? So they're following and tracking what I'm actually interested in.
Yeah, and all your Google Home or Alexa devices are recording things you're saying in your home, etc. Now, I'm not trying to talk about I'm not trying to paint some sort of dystopian Orwellian world, although that might exist. What I'm trying to say is that in many ways we're already ingesting that, right? How are things priced, right? When you go up to pick up an airline ticket, why is it 189 versus 229, right? You don't even notice, you don't know why, but it's already part of what we're experiencing. So, and remember also that AI, back to our original thing, AI, and I'm talking about the AI that's in the air you breathe, right, is really the product of maybe 10, 12, 15 entities in the world that are big enough, right? One random little company with half an engineer who's read half a book and calls himself or herself AI ain't AI, right? But if you're talking Microsoft, you're talking about Amazon, Google, Facebook, the US government, the Chinese government, right? Tencent, Alibaba, etc. There are 9 companies and maybe 3 non-corporate entities that control a lot of AI. They are affecting your life as we speak right now, including the fact that we're on this call and probably someone is figuring out the analytics on this call and figuring out what to market or what not to market, Dave and Aaron and Audrey and Dennis and Romi and Vivek right now. So, yeah, it's much more ubiquitous. That's a bit of a contradiction in terms. It's ubiquitous, but not in every aspect of life, right?
Yeah. Oh,
okay. We have another question here from Jonathan. So Jonathan, come on here and ask your question.
Yeah, so guys, I thought it was really interesting when you were saying about creativity, Viv, and I think Romi, you brought it up as well about, marketers measuring the wrong thing. Things you care about are completely different to what are being measured. And just wondered if you had a view on that. I mean, my kind of perspective is that there's such a focus on shareholder returns that, companies and teams are forced to measure the wrong things. But I think consumers think about it very differently. So, just interested in your perspective on that as to what you think's driving it and if you think anything's going to change over the foreseeable future.
Vivek, you start.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a little bit more than shareholder returns. It's like lack of risk. Probably it's kind of related to shareholder returns. The rest of it, they're kind of probably correlated in some other way. So I think in general, like risk taking is not necessarily in a large company is not necessarily encouraged, it's almost discouraged, quite frankly. And that's why, like, when big companies take risks, that's why I'm really definitely fascinated by how Amazon operates, where they create, they take a lot of risks, they isolate the risk, and they fund that risk effectively. They kind of have a black box approach to it. They're like, all right, we're going to do this, we're going to fund it with X dollars, and you can do whatever you want, really, right? They're not, at least these kind of new Amazon projects, so they're not, for a scale at which Amazon operates, they are not very constrained from that perspective. That's why Amazon came up with Alexa and Echo and all that stuff, which were kind of obviously orthogonal to their core business, really, right? So I think, is that creativity? It's kind of, in my mind, it is, because they kind of came up with something reasonably smart and put it out to market and nailed it and created a category. So I think it's shareholders' return. It is shareholders' return probably, but like, how much does the company have from a DNA perspective for risk-taking ability? I think that's where the creative output comes through.
Yeah, I just want to connect to that. Jonathan, I think it was a great question, and I think Vivek's answer is spot on. I would just try to add to that, or maybe extend it a little bit, right? Which is really the problem is what I call it at the molecular level in marketing, right? So I'll tell you why. If measurement is an input into the system, I'm going to only pick those channels to market that are very measurable, right? So if it's absolutely necessary for me to give you metrics on everything, I'm going to only pick channels that I can get metrics on, right? And so, for instance, this particular experience, I will have no metrics after this 90 minutes around my ROI on this 90 minutes, right? There's nothing that's going to come to my inbox or whatever, but I did it because I think, hey, it could be interesting. Who knows what might come out of it? Maybe nothing, maybe something. I won't be able to actually give you the antecedent of if somebody, of some success that might arise from this. If it was all about, hey, Romi, your time, 90 minutes has to be measured, I would just hang out on Facebook or whatever, something that's measurable, right? There are 87 likes, 92 dislikes, whatever, right? And so I feel like quite often the most effective marketing, Mark just talked about, these events he's throwing, right? They're way less measurable than doing a webcast, right? The conversation at the bar is not a measurable thing. I know for myself in my own small business, and I'm a minor player in these things, but it all happens over a glass of wine or a friendship, That's how Vivek and I got to know each other, over maybe a few too many beers, right? And so to me, it's molecular. You cannot ask a CMO to make everything measurable, and if that person agrees to it, they're making their own bet, and they're going to lie in it, and they'll be out in 36 months because they won't be able to show you results for every dollar spent.
And I want to add a little bit. I know Romi has this take about measurement, and the acronym Romi stands for return on marketing investment, and he kind of riffs off about how everybody's about return on investment, everybody's on measurement, and he's like he's obviously opposite that. He's like more about creativity, and which kind of like, and I want to kind of like, from a very deeply personal kind of example also, like we were having an internal meeting. We run these events. We started this X Day event about a couple of years ago. We used to do it once a year. Now we're doing it twice a year. And internally, same conversation came up in our marketing. Okay, look, hey, should we do the events? What is our return? And I'm like, I don't really care what happens. I want to run the event. That's it. That's my viewpoint on this. Is we could get one client, we could get 100 clients. It really doesn't even matter anymore. And I think that kind of like, there's got to be room within a company for a little bit of like, little bit of that kind of execution that we're like, well, we don't care. We want to do it. And that's when a lot of kind of, I think, I believe, obviously I do it. That's why I believe in it. That's why I do it. So a lot of interesting ideas come out of those kind of experience, those kind of pushing those things through.
Yeah, I think if we worship at the altar of false sciences, it's a mistake, right? So I think that when people say I'm doing AI, they believe it's there for a science and the correlations are perfect and so on and so forth. There's a phrase in Latin, pater semper incertus est, means of course that the father is always unknown biologically, the mother clearly is always known. So you never know the antecedents of a particular outcome. Why, for instance, Jonathan, did you buy that sweater, or the computer you use? There are 10 inputs to that. You don't know. You can't isolate it to one thing, right? And that's why marketing, what I call the marketing mix, should include some AI-based measurement stuff, some fun creative stuff, some just crazy experiments. and we're all the better for it. So.
Excellent. We are at the close of our show, unfortunately, but if you're watching this on video at a future date, you should join us every week. We're here and we go into networking after each show. We're getting ready to do that right now, so we're going to go ahead and close this out. Thank you so much, guys. Viv and Romi, you guys are wonderful and such a wonderful treasure of knowledge around AI as well. I do want to mention before we go, there is going to be a QuestionPro is actually having their event, and it's going to be on May 11th. And I'm going to share my screen real quick so you can see it. And we would like, it's free to register, but this is the event. You can go to the link that's at the top of the chat bar. But it's essentially QuestionPro X Day 2021 North America. Just look it up. They have speakers coming in from Amazon, the NBA, Kellogg's, Aon, and Oracle and Verizon. So it's a fun little event online. It's an annual event, and I think they may be doing it several times a year. But make sure that you can come to that and register for it. It'll be a great day. Thanks again, Viv and Romi. We're going to go ahead and close out now. Take us out, Audrey.
Thank you very much.
Okay.